Alright, so if you pop off that leadership document that you're doing and open up your class calendar, you'll find that the assessment notification is here on your class calendar. There's a link to it. So I'm asking you now if you can open that up. Do you want to open that up?
Oh, my laptop's about to die.
Okay. So you're going to open that up and take a copy of it and stick it into your CAFS folder. You may have it in your assessment folder within your CAFS folder, depending on how you've got your folder set up. Otherwise, have it just sitting outside all your other resource management individuals and groups, just sitting outside of that, but it's within your CAFS folder. Ms. Stanleyforth and I both need to be able to access that. Okay? So taking a copy of the assessment notification. Can I also ask you to make a copy, please, of the link that's below? Because this is the document you're going to use to submit your assessment task, that you're going to answer the questions on that document. So making sure that you've got a copy of the assessment notification and you've got this document where you're going to submit your responses on, which is the second link. So there's two links there that you're taking a copy of. Don't take a copy of the third one. I'll explain to you what that is in a minute. Okay, has everyone done that? I'll also, let's go actually, so we'll go to the assessment notification. I'll also suggest to you that you have the assessment notification open so that you can make comments on the side of your assessment notification as I go through and talk about it. So you can put your little comment boxes, you can highlight and comment to the areas where I give you some tips and advice. This is your second assessment task, you can see there, and it is touching on resource management and individuals and groups. It is a research-based sort of project. Understanding though, I will go through and explain to you that we're not actually carrying out any research for this task, we're actually just setting up the research. We'll carry out research when we do our IRPs in Year 12. This is practice leading up to that task in Year 12. So it is due Monday the 1st of July, so week 10 this term, and there's no edits to any of your documents after 8:30, so then it's fairness for both classes. Okay, this is weighted at 35%, so it's quite a large percentage. You have 3 outcomes there that you're being assessed on. And let's have a look here at the tasks. So students will be given a focus area to base their research assessment task on, and students will need to develop valid and reliable research methodologies to examine their chosen research question, statement or hypotheses. These research methods will not need to be carried out, they'll just need to be planned. So I'll explain that to you now as we go through the assessment notification, but this is the main point here. No one needs to carry out any research. No one needs to go and interview anyone. No one needs to go and questionnaire anyone. No one needs to go and observe anyone. This is just about planning what we would do if we were carrying out research. So, this is where you might like to start to highlight as I talk. So for all of the parts of the assessment, so all parts of this task, we're going to focus on the availability and accessibility of aged services in the local area being Sutherland Shire. So let's have a look at that first before we go any further. So we go availability and accessibility. These are our slides we looked at back in resource management. So when we talk about availability, how available is a resource for the individual? Is it available 24/7? Is it available online? Is it available by walking through off the streets? Is it available in all suburbs? So keeping that in mind, that's the information we learned about in the last topic that we did. When we talk about accessibility, how can people access this service? Is it going to cost them money? Is it only accessible to people that may have, for instance, a disability? Do they have to access this through a referral from a doctor? So thinking about availability, how available is this resource to people? And how accessible is this resource or this service to people? Keeping in mind, they're the two bits of information or two bits of information we need to refer back to when we are thinking about this question that we're going to be researching, or this topic we're going to be researching. When we talk about aged services, aged are anybody that are 65 plus. So I'm going to take that down. That's our definition in CAFS, and we'll use that definition right through the HSC. Anybody who is aged is 65 plus. When we talk about services in CAFS, these are the lists of our services that we're looking at. So it's left, so these are the types of services. So left 8 is a way that we remember them in the HSC. So we might be looking at some financial support for the aged. We might be looking at transport. We might be looking at accommodation and housing, healthcare, counselling, education, employment and legal aid. So you might want to take those down quickly, but they are also too, I'll show you where they are located, I'll pull that back up in a minute. They are located just here. You can see here I've listed them just here underneath the question on your assessment notification. But you can add them if you'd like to the side to remind you. Can I suggest when you do this research or this planning for this research, I'll go into a bit more detail in a minute, but keep in mind to keep this small. If we say services that are available to the aged and we do that on a very large platform and go all types of services, it becomes too big. So I'm going to suggest to you that you think about picking one of these types of services and keeping that as your focus. It might be about transport. Is there sufficient transport that's available and accessible for aged? As in, do they have a travel concession card? Can they get onto the train if they're on a wheelchair? Can they access Activus, which is a service that's a local service? How do they access that? How available is that to them? So starting to think about the aged and one type of service. If we do it across different services, this will become way too big. Trying to keep this simple, okay? So, what are we doing? First few questions are very general questions, and then we'll become more specific in our research methodologies as we go on. So the first question is to distinguish between primary and secondary research. Now, what does the word distinguish mean? This distinguish means to show differences. So you're going to have to use your comparative language where you're showing differences. So differs from, however, unlike, compared to, rather than, trying to use your comparative language where you're going to show the differences. So distinguish between primary and secondary research. Understanding we need to know what these two types of research are. If we have P for primary research, what does that mean? It's the research that we've personally done ourselves. If we have the S for secondary, and we talk about secondary research, that is when it is somebody else's research, where it's been carried out by people before us. So P being personal, S being secondary, having to show those differences, 2 marks. Same rule applies, 2 marks, three lines per mark, so you're looking at about 6 lines to try and answer that question. Next one is examine. Examine means to inquire into, so that means we have to give information of detail and depth. The types of data, so we know about quantitative and qualitative as our 2 types of data, and if we, I've got that there, if we have a look at our slides that we've had before on qualitative and quantitative, we can see that quantitative is about numbers. It's got the N in it, so we're talking about numerical data, and we've got qualitative being about people's opinions, beliefs and thoughts. That's the information that we've received in previous lessons. So understanding that we need to come back to our information that we know from previous lessons. So examine the types of data that can be collected when carrying out research. So you're going to need to think about some examples. So what sort of data are you going to collect, quantitative and qualitative? But you're going to possibly need to even give some specific examples of that quantitative and qualitative data that you might collect. So it might be that you get people answering a yes-no type question, and that's going to give you numerical data, and that's something then that you're going to be able to present in a graph. The next question is outline. An outline means to summarise in main points, so it can be presented in point form. You're allowed to do that when it comes to the HSC. The meaning of research question, statement and hypotheses. So you could even have 3 dot points, and they are just, you're giving an outline, so even a summary of what is a research question, what is a research statement, what is a research hypothesis. That is something that you can go away and have a look at the internet, or you can have a look through the textbook and come up with a definition for each of those. But you can use also 2 dot points. Now the next question. With the research focus being on availability and accessibility, which goes back to our question that's at the top of our notification, of aged services in the local area, propose a research statement, hypothesis, question, statement or hypotheses that you can use to develop your research. Propose means to put forward a suggestion, put forward an idea. Okay, so you're going to have to think about coming up with a question, a statement or hypotheses around the availability and accessibility of aged services in Sutherland Shire that you're going to use to base your research on. Now, as I said, you're not carrying out the research, as we're going to talk about that in a minute. You're not carrying out any research, but you're planning and putting together your thoughts around how you would carry out that research if you had to, but we're not. It's about actually just planning. Because next year, or in term 4, when we start the HSC, we're going to then, as a group, carry out that research. Not necessarily this task, but we're going to go through those steps, just beyond planning. So as part of your research, you will need to set up the process that will be used for 2 of the 3 listed research methodologies. So down the bottom, next part of your assessment task, there is an observation, there is an interview, and there is a questionnaire. You have got a choice. You can choose 2 of those 3. You are not required to do all 3. You only have to do 2. You need to keep in mind the research question, statement, hypothesis you've stated above. So this question 4 here, as you start doing the next steps, you need to think about what is the statement, what is the question, what is the hypothesis that I've said that I'm going to research? And you need to keep that in mind as you go through these next steps. So you need to keep that in mind as stated above. Please note that you're only setting up this process. You do not need to carry out any actual research. There's no research being carried out. So the first one you've got is the option of an observation. And you'll notice that as we go through these, observation, questionnaire and interview, they are very similar. Okay, so you can access the same sort of marks. It's a total of 10 marks for each of the sections. First question for observation is distinguish. What does distinguish mean? To show differences. We've already discussed that in the previous questions. To show differences between a participant and a non-participant observation. So that's something that either you have just gone through in class or you're about to go through with your teacher in the next few lessons. So participant being somebody who's actually involved in whatever the activity is that's being observed, or non-participant where someone may sit on the outskirts and actually observe what's actually happening for whatever it is that you've decided to observe as part of your research. So just giving the differences. The next one is to explain who will be involved in your observation. Now explain means cause and effect, show relationships. It's not just a dot point, or when we say who would be involved, my nan, we need details. You need to show some relationship about your research question, statement, hypotheses, and who it is that you're going to choose to observe. When would you carry out this observation? Would you carry it out in the mornings? Would you carry it out in the afternoons? Would you carry it out once a month? Would you carry it out once a week? So you need to think about, when would you carry out these observations? Where would you complete your observation? Would it be at a train station? Would it be at a bus stop? Would it be in a doctor's surgery? Would it be in a shopping centre? So some details about where you would complete that observation. What will you be looking for? Are you looking for choices that people make? Are you looking for certain behaviours within people? Are you looking for how many people might be accessing that service? So giving some detail about what it is you're actually looking for while you're carrying out that observation. You need to construct a recording sheet for your observation. What will be used when you carry out your research? Will it be a tally card? Will it be a sociogram? How are you going to actually record your observation? Describe how you would present the findings of your observation. Are you going to present that, again, as a sociogram? I'm going to change the names though. I'm going to change them to numbers so that I'm protecting people's privacy and making sure that it's ethical in my research. How am I going to present that? Am I going to present that as if I've been telling? Is it going to be a table? Is it going to be a graph? How am I going to present that? And remember, describe is description of characteristics and features. So giving me detail about what that looks like. When we talk about justify for E, justify why this would be a suitable research method to use is you're putting forward an argument. Justify means to put forward an argument. You're going to have to use your judgment language. Going to have to use your words to argue, your judgment words to argue why this is a suitable method of research for what it is that you've chosen as your research question, hypothesis, or statement. Now the same thing happens for questionnaire. Distinguish between opened and closed questions. So showing differences between an opened and a closed question. Remember, an open question, you're going to get detail. You're going to get more than one word. You're going to get maybe a sentence, maybe a thought, an opinion, a belief with detail. Or in a closed question is a yes-no answer. One word, they make a choice. That's the difference. You're having a look at what are the differences using your comparative language. Same thing. Who will be involved? When will you carry out your questionnaire? Where can people complete your questionnaire? And what information are you trying to collect from your questionnaire? Maybe your questionnaire will be online. Maybe you'll stand in the street and you'll do an oral questionnaire and you'll ask them the questions so that you get the answers back. Maybe you might post the questionnaire in people's letterboxes. Who are you going to questionnaire? Is it carers? Is it nurses? Is it just anybody in the local community? Is it the elderly that are in nursing homes? Is it people standing at the train station? Is it in a shopping centre? You need to start to think about where, who, when, and what are you going to be collecting in your questionnaire. You're going to construct a questionnaire. We're going to go through that in the next few lessons before this task is about how to construct a good questionnaire. What does a good questionnaire look like? And how do you make sure that you order your questions? So construct a questionnaire using Google Forms that will be used when carrying out your research for your chosen question, statement, hypothesis. Remember, we're not sharing this questionnaire with anyone. It's not going out to the community. It is for marking purposes for us to have a look at how you're actually setting up those questionnaires and what sort of questions are you thinking about. No one's needing to fill it in, but you're going to set up a questionnaire. Describe characteristics and features of how you would present your findings from the questionnaire. Graphs, tables. Are you going to take people's quotes? How are you going to present that? You need to give some detail, those characteristics and features of what that might look like. A pie graph, different colours, different segments showing different percentages. It might be statistics, such as percentages, that might be even in a table. How are you going to do that? Is it a bar graph? Is it a column graph? Is it a line graph? You need to think about how you're going to present that data. Again, justify, putting forward that argument why that is a suitable research method, using your judgment language. We come down to interviews. Remember, we're only choosing, from these three methods, we're choosing two. You might do questionnaires and interviews. You might do observation and interviews. Whichever choice it is that you make. Distinguish between structured and unstructured interviews. Again, showing the differences. Structured, planned, organised questions, set of questions of what you're going to ask. And you're going to ask those same questions to each person that you interview. Unstructured, you're able to change your questions depending on who it is you're interviewing, depending on the responses that they give. How do you then respond to that interview? You then do that through an unstructured interview by not having a set sequence of questions to be asking. Again, explaining who were you going to interview, when will you carry out those interviews, where would you carry out those interviews, and what information are you trying to collect. Again, is this something you might be able to do an interview over the phone? Is this an interview that you might do at a train station? Is this an interview that you'll do at a nursing home? Whereabouts would you do it? Who is it that you're going to be asking? People in the general community. Are you going to be interviewing maybe our aged minister? Are you going to be interviewing somebody from Sutherland Shire Council? So starting to think about who are these people that you might be interviewing. You're constructing a list of interview questions. So you're putting those questions together of what it is you might be asking within this interview. Remember, we're not having to carry this out. We're not interviewing anyone. We're just planning who we would, what we would ask, where would that be carried out. Describe how would you present your findings from an interview. Would you present that in a transcript? Interviewer said, respondent said. Would you be presenting that with quotes and definitions that you might be able to put into a report? Thinking about how would you present your interview responses. If you're asking closed questions in an interview, you're asking people yes and no type answers, and you're going to interview 100 people, you've got numerical data, you've got quantitative data. Maybe you might present that in a graph because you've got numbers, you've got a tally of how many people have said yes and how many people have said no. Depends on the type of questions that you ask. And again, justifying, so putting for an argument of why it is you would use that research method when you're researching your question statement or hypothesis that you've chosen. You do have to include a bibliography. So at the end, and I'll show you where you're going to fill that in, and it is a total of 30 marks. Now the document that you're going to answer all your questions on is this one here, which is the second link on your class calendar. So you're going through and filling in your answers here. So Miss Staniforth and I can easily find where you've answered each of your questions. When you come down to this section here, remember, you're doing two of the three. All three are listed there. So you've got observation, interview and questionnaire are all there. You don't have to do all three. You pick two. The two that you've chosen to actually use as your research methods. This here is where you do that when, who, when, where and what. In this box here.
I'm listening.
No, Siri, I'm not talking to you. This is where you're going to do your explanation in this box. Remember though, it's not just a dot point. It's not just, I'm going to interview grandma. You need to think about putting in detail. It is an explanation, it's cause and effect. It's about showing relationship. It's not just a dot point, one word type answer in there. So again, you've got the research methods. Remember, we're not carrying them out. And down the bottom, you've got your opportunity in here to put your bibliography. Remember to refer to your school diary on how to write your bibliography correctly. So it's in your school diary about how to reference your sources that you've used. On your assessment notification, I have attached here a link, which is the last link that's also too on your class calendar. I have set this up that if you have questions about the assessment task, to make sure that it's fair across both classes, if you've got a question about, what, for instance, I'm going to give you an example, how many questions do I ask in my questionnaire? I can then give you an answer and everybody can see that, so that we're not all asking the same questions each lesson. That question comes up quite often. How many questions do I have to ask in an interview? How many questions do I have to ask in a questionnaire? And my answer always is how long is a piece of string? Because if I say to you, you only need 10 questions in a questionnaire or in an interview, and you ask name, age, suburb, sex, there's 4 questions and you only have 6 left. 4 questions have already been taken up by just collecting that basic sort of data. So I don't give you a number of how many questions in a questionnaire, how many questions in an interview. You need to think about how many questions do I need to ask to get the information that I need, and I also too can keep the participants engaged in completing that questionnaire. So as I said, if you ask me that question, how many questions in a questionnaire, how many questions in an interview, my answer is how long is a piece of string? Because it depends on what you're asking. Okay, and I'm not going to say 10 and then limit you, that you can't ask any more. Alright, so there's that where you can ask questions if you're unsure, and then I can answer and everybody can see that. Now, I have also to put, that's the link there for that document to complete your assessment task on. I have also to put some links here as some pre-reading. I've done some research already for you about different services that are available in Sutherland Shire for the aged. So before you even start thinking about your research question, topic, hypothesis or statement, you need to come back to here and do some reading first. What is it that's already available, or what are the issues with services here in Sutherland Shire for the aged? There's already some articles there for you to have a look at. I suggest to you that you also to make sure you look at the marking criteria when you're answering, when you're completing your task. Do you need examples? Do you need a range of examples? What is it that I'm required to do to access that top mark range? What is the marking criteria saying? Again, there's no number, but it's a range of examples. It's more than one. Are they good quality examples? Having a look at the marking criteria to ensure that you're doing what is required for each of those questions. Is there anything that you'd like to ask, ladies? Yes, Joanna.
For question 2 in the first part,
yeah,
it says 4 marks. How many lines is that?
So each mark is worth 3 lines. So if it is, they're coming up, so if it is 4 marks, then it's 3, so that's 12.
Okay.
Remember, it's written, so it's going to be less typed.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, that's the rule that applies to HSC, which is writing. This is not writing, this is typed,
Yes.
so it will be less.
Okay.
Okay? Any other questions? It's not something that would be clear to you right now as into what am I going to be doing. You actually need to do some reading first. What are the services that are available? You need to think about which one of these services may I wish to target as part of my focus around my research. And remember, it's for age, so it's 65 plus. This is not something you can do the night before.
So you're only choosing one service to...
I would, if you do more than one service, it's going to become too big.
Okay.
And you're not, when you actually write your questions in the questionnaire or your questions in interviews, it's too hard to cover them both of those areas. I would suggest that you pick one of these to keep your focus on.
Yep.
Yep. Any other questions? No? Alright, thanks. I'll stop recording that then so then I'll post that up online.